Yeah.
I tell you what, a person who believes that this wasn't set up by our own government is an idiot.
Okay, well, now it's time for us to go over the complex sentence. And, you know, I'm not really trying to do this in a fast, and if it takes more than one video, that's fine with me also, because I think understanding the complex sentence is crucial, not only for sentence structure and not only for being able to identify problems with sentence structure, but also for being able to analyze literature in general. Because we have words that become indicators for us when something is changing in what we are reading. The author uses words to let us know or help us to understand the changes in meaning and to emphasize meaning itself. So let's get back to the complex sentence here. Okay, so well, the complex sentence, of course, contains more than one clause. Okay, it has to have one independent clause. But in addition to an independent clause, it also has to have what we call a dependent clause. But I don't want you to look at it like that. This is how I want you to look at it, and it may be easier for you to understand. The complex sentence consists of two independent clauses, two or more independent clauses, but only one of the independent clauses are going to be free of a subordinating conjunction. Now let me say it again in a different way. A complex sentence contains at least two independent clauses, with one of the independent clauses beginning with a subordinating conjunction, a special word. Now, the reason I want you to look at it like this is because I don't want you to lose the focus of the fact that every clause has a subject-verb relationship, and in a complex sentence, you do have two clauses that have subject-verb relationships. So let's look at this closely to see the difference between the independent clauses in the compound sentence and the independent clauses in the complex sentence. So let's take a look at this. Okay, now, if this is how it looks when we break it down, we have our independent clause. Okay, whoa, I'm sorry, we skipped something here. Okay, okay, so wait a minute. One second. Okay, so we have something out of place here. I don't know where that came from. That's not supposed to be there yet. Okay, so complex sentence. Okay, so we have a complex sentence where we have one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses, but the way I want you to look at it is that we have at least two independent clauses, but one of the independent clauses begins with a special word. And here's the chart for the special words. And this is what makes the complex sentence complex. These words. They are called subordinating conjunctions. You put these words at the beginning of an independent clause, and you turn that clause dependent. In other words, one of these words, when put in front of an independent clause, creates a situation where that clause no longer is independent, meaning that you can't put a full stop at the end and have a simple sentence. No, it turns it independent, meaning that it needs some meaning to go with it. This is why in a complex sentence, you must have at least one independent clause. You must have one independent clause in order to provide the necessary meaning for the now dependent clause. So let's look at this. We're going to go more into that in a second. Let's look at this chart. So here's the chart of subordinating conjunctions. And we have them in categories, okay? The chart is in categories: time, cause and effect, opposition, condition. Now, the reason why you want to make this chart a part of your brain is because if you're writing and you use the wrong subordinating conjunction, it's going to be a disaster for your meaning, because you can completely change the meaning of a complex sentence by using the wrong subordinating conjunction before one of your independent clauses. So we have independent clause, we have subordinating conjunction, then another independent clause. The thing is that subordinating conjunction completely changes the meaning of the independent clause that comes after it, okay? And how does it do it in general? It forces that independent clause to become dependent on the clause before it or the independent clause after it. Okay, so I know we're going to look at an example in a moment, but I really need you to try to grasp this concept that a complex sentence has at least two independent clauses. The difference between the complex and the compound is one of the independent clauses has a subordinating conjunction in front of it. And here's our chart. So I know you have it in the SCORM. Make the chart a part of you. You really need to study this chart because you need to be able to differentiate between the categories. Very important. So let's look at our example here. Okay, we're not going to get to an example yet. We're going to get to an example in a moment. Relative pronouns, of course, they are going to be the that, which, who. That, which, and who, of course, are words that we put at the beginning of independent clauses in order to make it dependent in the same way that we had in the list. So these are just additions to the list, but very important additions to the list. We're going to go more into these words because they have their own special things that you need to know about them. Okay, so let's look at our first example here, our first sentence. After the town was evacuated, the hurricane began. Now, if for a moment we forget about this subordinating conjunction after, and for your information, this word falls under the category of time. So we know we're dealing with time when we're using this particular subordinating conjunction. If we ignore after and we just look at the town was evacuated, the hurricane began, we can see the two independent clauses. The first one, town was evacuated. The second one, hurricane began. So we got two subject-verb relationships. Now, what we did to this first independent clause is we added a subordinating conjunction. And the reason we added this subordinating conjunction was to add meaning. We wanted to let the reader know that the town was evacuated after the hurricane began. Now, if we wanted to say it in a different way, we could use of course, a different, say for instance, we want to say condition, meaning that, in other words, and you can get the meaning by me saying the sentence, if the hurricane begins, the town will be evacuated. And so we had to slightly change the meaning of the sentence, and we made it future because we're using if, because of course it is if is conditional. But if we meant to say future, then we wouldn't say after. Okay, if we meant to say condition, that this will happen because of this is happening, then we wouldn't use after. We would use a subordinating conjunction that deals directly with the condition. But if we want to deal solely with time, then we wouldn't use the condition under the condition category if. So it just depends on what you're trying to say. But you can't say one thing, or think one thing, and then write another thing and expect the reader to understand the thing you were thinking. You have to write it the way you're thinking it, and this is where the subordinating conjunctions come in. This is where they come in. The hurricane began after the town evacuated. So here we have after again, and we're still dealing with time. But there's a point here that I want to make a rule that I want you to remember. Now we see the same, in essence, the same sentence, same meaning. We just have the clauses in different places. Well, this is a very important point because if, and I need for you to make sure you get this, if the subordinating conjunction is placed at the beginning of the first independent clause, then you need a comma separating the first and the second. If the subordinating conjunction is put at the beginning of the second independent clause, then you don't need a comma separating it from the first independent clause. Another way we can look at it, and we could just consider the whole clause, including the subordinating conjunction, we can call it a dependent clause. If we put the dependent clause first, then we need a comma before the independent clause. If we put the dependent clause second, then we don't need a comma between it and the independent clause that comes before it. So this is a very simple concept to get, very simple to understand, this comma rule, but it's very, very important. You cannot ignore the comma because the comma is a part of the complex sentence. It is a part of it. So I want you to go over the rest of these sentences in the SCORM and go over the rest of in the SCORM. All of them, actually, I want you to go over all of them and understand, how, or get an idea of how the subordinating conjunctions are used. We're going to continue. Okay. Here we're back to our chart. And I can't emphasize enough how important this chart is, and I need for you to, really remember how important this chart is. And don't ignore it. Remember it. Make it easy on yourself. Try to memorize as much of it as possible, and try to use it as much as possible in your writing to try to be aware of when you're using it and how you're using it. And then that way you can be aware of how and when it is being used by another author. Okay, so the compound, okay, so we're going to move on. I'm sorry, we're not going to move on. We're going to talk about this compound prepositions. Okay, so we talked about subordinating conjunctions, but oftentimes we may get confused with a subordinating conjunction with a compound preposition, because compound prepositions, of course, use the same words that you would use when creating a dependent clause. Okay, let's take this first sentence. The town was evacuated because of the hurricane. Now we know because looking at that chart falls under the reason when you want to tell the reason of something. Now, if you use this word as a subordinating conjunction, then what comes after it must contain a subject-verb relationship. In this sentence, of course, we don't have that. We just have a phrase, a prepositional phrase. So we don't have a subject-verb relationship, and we learned when we talked about phrases that the difference between a phrase and a clause is one has a subject-verb relationship and the other doesn't. Well, in this case, this one doesn't. So we don't have a complex sentence. So if your intention was to have a complex sentence, and you don't have one here, you just simply have a compound preposition. And a compound preposition is just made up of two words, a word and a preposition. Okay, so you have to be aware of what you're doing. And when you see that in a sentence, as far as identifying the error, make sure that that is the intention of the author by what is being read, and of course, if you're taking the SAT, based on the answer choices being provided. Because, but if you don't study the list, the chart, then you really wouldn't be able to identify that that is in fact a compound preposition. And of course, if you don't know that you're supposed to have a subject-verb relationship after it, you wouldn't know that either. Okay. Okay, so just be aware of compound prepositions like because of, while at, while on, and so forth and so on. It may be a good idea to get that, whole idea of compound preposition down in your brain. That list is a nice list. It's not the whole list for sure, but it is a nice one to know, and you can get that in the SCORM. Now for what we want to talk about, the next type of sentence. But I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to allow you to digest the complex sentence a bit and do whatever you need to do with your notes. And we're going to come back with another video on the compound complex sentence. This is the gold sentence. This brings everything that we have learned about sentence structure together in one sentence. This is the mastery of being able to write a sentence. When you can write these types of sentences correctly, you know that you have mastered the sentence.
In Islamic school. I'll talk about tomorrow.
That's rolling the hard way. We don't want to roll quite that hard. We want to get one of them little minibuses.
Welcome to the newtimeflash.com. Welcome to the newtimeflash.com.
Oh, yeah. All right. All right. Check this out.
I would not be asking any one of you to take this leap if I did not have complete faith in your ability to succeed. Your courage will never be more needed than it is today.
I tell you what, a person who believes that this wasn't set up by our own government is an idiot.